So the economists who are worried about this argue that, yeah, we're going to see higher inflation for longer. And, for instance, it might not fall as easily back to the Fed's 2% target as easily as many currently expect once supply chain bottlenecks from the pandemic ease. There's a possibility that instead of these forces pulling down on inflation, the reversal could mean that they start contributing to it.
Gwynn Guilford, reporter for the Wall Street Journal, thank you so much.
Thank you.
In New York, I'm Sabri Ben-Achour with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Law Firm.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Distracted driving is deadly. Teens? Yes, but adults too. And there are millions more adults than teens. Arrive alive. Let's end distracted driving.
Learn more at waynehogan.law.
Baptist Health is a proud sponsor of First Coast Connect with Melissa Ross.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
When it comes to demonstrations in Florida, is there selective enforcement? I'm Melissa Ross, and just ahead this hour on First Coast Connect, protesters for Cuban independence get thumbs up from state leaders. But activists behind other causes say their demonstrations have been criminalized. We'll take a look at the federal injunction against the state's new anti-protest law and what it means for free expression in the state of Florida. That's ahead. Then later,
she was talented and she wanted more than anything to write, and to write serious literature.
A fresh look at famed Florida author Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. Plus, a downtown bartender competition in Jacksonville you won't want to miss. That and more, all ahead. After the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The Biden administration is rolling out expanded child tax credits for up to 60 million families. It's part of the president's coronavirus relief package. The first monthly payments are being deposited today. NPR's Andrea Hsu explains how money from a tax credit is being advanced to American families.
It's a tax credit, but what's going out today to families is an advance payment of that tax credit. So in the past, you would get this as a one-time lump sum when you filed your taxes. Let's say you have a kid who's 8. Before this year, you would have gotten that $2,000 credit when you filed your taxes. Now though, it's more. It's up to $3,000, and you'll get half of that spread over the next 6 months, and then the other half when you file your taxes next year.
NPR's Andrea Hsu reporting. Later today at the White House, the president will meet German Chancellor Angela Merkel. As Esme Nicholson reports, they're expected to discuss the pandemic and a gas pipeline that's being built from Russia to Germany.
While German-U.S. relations have improved significantly since President Biden took office, Berlin and Washington do not see eye to eye on everything. One major disagreement involves Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to Germany, which the U.S. opposes. Biden recently waived sanctions on the German company building the almost complete pipeline in order to allow more time to resolve the issue. But Merkel says it's unlikely they'll find a solution this week, stressing she would instead put pressure on Moscow to ensure that Europe's energy security is not compromised by the project. Biden is the fourth US president to host Merkel, who is not seeking a fifth term in office. For NPR News, I'm Esme Nicholson in Berlin.
Meanwhile, catastrophic flooding in Germany has left at least 33 people dead and dozens of others missing. There are reports of deaths and missing people in neighboring Belgium. The region has had exceptionally heavy rain this week. Washington State Governor Jay Inslee has declared a drought emergency for his state. It means water supplies have dropped and could pose a hardship to agriculture and the environment. At the same time, fire crews in the Pacific Northwest are battling wildfires that have scorched hundreds of square miles. From Spokane Public Radio, Doug Nadvornik prepared this report.
The Northwest Interagency Coordination Center is tracking at least 15 major fires in Washington and Oregon. At several of those, fire bosses say they've had windows of calm weather that allowed crews to dig fire lines and stop flames from advancing. But the forecast calls for gusty winds to return in many areas. That's a mixed blessing. The winds will spread flames and embers, but the cooler air should lower unseasonably hot temperatures by 10 to 15 degrees and give firefighters a slight reprieve. The winds should also blow out some of the smoke that's lingering over much of the inland Northwest. For NPR News, I'm Doug Nadvornik in Spokane, Washington.
You're listening to NPR News.
The time is 4 minutes after 9. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Michelle Corum. New curriculum standards for civics, government, and Holocaust education were adopted by the State Board of Education yesterday. The State Department of Education says the new guidelines prioritize civic pride and government participation. Governor Ron DeSantis spoke at the meeting in favor of the updates.
Whatever pathway you choose, you have to be able to discharge the duties of being a citizen. So this civics education is universally applicable, regardless of what field you go into, regardless of what you do in your life.
More than 20 people spoke during the meeting's public comment period, among them Marina Welch with Women's March Florida. Welch says the standards are part of recent actions by the state to remove critical race theory from the classes.
The exclusion of civics courses, including CRT, will, by definition, limit information. Our state's most precious asset, our children, should be educated to arrive at and make informed decisions.
Critical race theory is based on the premise that racism is embedded within American society and institutions. Alternate standards in math and English language arts were also approved by the board for students with significant cognitive disabilities. Jack's Beach right now, it's 83 degrees. We have a partly sunny sky. This afternoon, a high near 89 degrees.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Atlassian, makers of teamwork software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello, committed to moving work forward for millions of people, thousands of teams, and hundreds of the Fortune 500. Atlassian.com.
Protesters in support of Cuba are getting acclaim in Florida, but other groups say their demonstrations in the streets have been criminalized. Good morning. We're live from Studio 5. I'm Melissa Ross, and this is First Coast Connect. Thanks for listening. Just ahead this hour, why some activist groups in the Sunshine State are fighting Florida's new anti-protest law. Give us a call and join us. It's 549-2937. Then later, a fresh look at iconic Florida author Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. But first this hour, people across the state have been demonstrating in solidarity with Cuba over the past few days, including here in Jacksonville. Cubans and Cuban Americans have risen up, demanding an end to the communist dictatorship that's plagued the island nation for decades. Governor Ron DeSantis, Senator Marco Rubio, and others have all praised these protests. But at the same time, there's a new law in Florida on the books that critics say actually criminalizes protest. Activists supporting other causes who have taken to the streets, particularly last summer in the wake of the death of George Floyd in Minnesota, well, they say Florida leaders are using selective enforcement in which types of protests they support and which they crack down on. A coalition of groups has filed an injunction in federal court against Florida's anti-protest law. This coalition includes the North Side Coalition of Jacksonville, a prominent local activist group. What's this all about? Dr. Micah Kubik is executive director of the ACLU of Florida, involved in filing this motion, and he is on the line. Micah, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. And as we talk about protest in Florida, which kinds of protests tend to get praise and which kind tend to get people arrested, give us a call. It's 549-2937. Already getting your calls. Emails to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Tweets to @MelissaInJax. Or you can always comment on our Facebook page. So tell us about this injunction that's been filed in federal court on behalf of Northside Coalition of Jacks and a slew of other groups around the state.
That's right. So earlier this year, the state legislature passed a new bill that really effectively criminalizes peaceful protests in Florida. This was the governor's number one legislative priority this year. It passed the legislature, and it essentially says that if you show up at a protest and the police decide that that event is disruptive, a very subjective standard, that anyone who's present at that event, even if it's 1,000 people and just one person engages in disruption, that everyone there is guilty of a riot in the language of the law. And that essentially criminalizes peaceful protests. So we filed a lawsuit to block that law, which also has lots of other terrible provisions, including one that allows motorists to run over protesters and not suffer any consequences for it. And then yesterday we filed an injunction asking that it immediately be blocked while we wait for the actual trial. As the events of this week demonstrate, this is a law that really is very subjective and that allows law enforcement to decide when they're going to protect the First Amendment and when they're not. And that's one of the big problems with it, is that it is so subjective. It allows them to criminalize peaceful protests, but also retain some discretion about who they decide to criminalize and who they do not.
Here's a quote from Ben Frazier of Jacksonville, president of the Northside Coalition of Jacksonville. He believes this new law targets Black organizers and protesters and their allies who stood up to say Black Lives Matter and for racial and economic justice. You are saying then, Micah, that the wording of this law is so vague and overbroad that it gives too much license to law enforcement to hold some people criminally responsible for protesting and not others. And so when you referred to the protests of a few days ago, you were talking about people who rose up admirably in support of freedom in Cuba, and how that was treated by law enforcement and political leaders in Florida in contrast to some of the protests we saw last summer. Is that right?
Yes. So as in so many things, Mr. Frazier is correct. And the reality is that this bill was passed in order to make life more difficult for those who are protesting for racial justice, who are protesting for Black Lives Matter. And to know that, you need look no further than the comments that the governor, Ron DeSantis, himself made at the time that the bill was introduced and passed, where he said that it was really targeted at folks who were protesting for Black Lives Matter and for racial justice. The law says that blocking traffic, for example, is a crime and is something that folks are guilty of, essentially a riot under the law. We saw in Miami, at least, over the last few days, lots of incidents of blocking traffic. And there, the police showed admirable restraint in not persecuting folks. But the thing is that the First Amendment is not just supposed to be for the protests that the governor or individual police officers agree with. The First Amendment protects speech of all kinds. The First Amendment protects peaceful protests of all kinds. And the law should not be weaponized just to oppose the folks who are advocating for things that the governor disagrees with. In this case, racial justice and accountability for police.
Yeah, under this new law, it's a third-degree felony to do things like block traffic, obstruct roadways. We did see Cuban protesters, Cuban Americans, and those in support of Freedom for Cuba marching onto the Palmetto Expressway in Miami this week, blocking traffic in a show of support for Cuba. So in the governor and others not criminalizing those protesters, have they shot themselves in the foot? Does this give your case a stronger legal argument?
Well, I think it certainly demonstrates that this is about that the entire law was not about order, law and order, as the governor repeatedly claimed. It was not about public safety, that it was always about silencing particular voices. He said that loud and clear from the beginning, and I think the behavior of the last 2 days with this very selective enforcement, with this wholehearted embrace of protests, really demonstrates that that is what the law is about. It's about criminalizing particular voices, especially black and brown.
Or, Micah, is it a performative maneuver on the part of the governor to please a base that he knows will support him for re-election and also perhaps in a 2024 run for president? The governor, who's Ivy League educated, both undergraduate and at law school, certainly knows that this law might be unlikely to pass constitutional muster. So in that sense, was it all simply a performative exercise in service to his ambitions?
I mean, I can't speculate about the governor's motives. What I can say is that the impact here is to pass laws that are unconstitutional and then pursue them in the most unconstitutional way possible. For someone who attended law school and some pretty elite ones at that, the governor sure does push through a whole bunch of laws that are brazenly, wantonly unconstitutional, and certainly has been using the power of his office to try and silence and chill those who disagree with him. I think that's contrary to our values as Americans. It's contrary to what we should expect from the governor, and regardless of the reasons that he does it, I think it is really contrary to the spirit of democracy itself. And I think you see that in a lot of different things that he's doing. And I think it's particularly ironic that in so many ways he's acting in ways that are contrary to the spirit of democracy at the same time that he provides full-throated support for protests that are about bringing democracy to Cuba.
549-2937. Give us a call. Eric in Arlington. Hello, Eric. Good morning.
Hey, Melissa, I wanted to give, I think there's a little context that needs to be added to this conversation. First of all, I just want to say, as far as the conversation goes, I think this law blew up in DeSantis' face because the Cuban communists are sort of his pet in Florida politically. And now that they're
not communists, they're opposed to communism. But go ahead, Eric.
Well, exactly. But you characterized a few minutes ago that this is some sort of these protests as righteous or whatever. I don't see them that way at all. Batista, who was the American puppet in leader of Cuba before Castro took over, was no paragon of civil rights himself. And the people that fled Cuba were basically the white Cubans, the Cubans of direct Spanish descent, that were wealthy and lost their land and property.
Eric, that's all true. But the issue that we're talking about today is people demonstrating in Florida in support of Cubans having freedom to earn money, freedom to speak out, freedom to do all kinds of things we take for granted in America. You know, they're not allowed to do that on that island. And when you protest in support of Cuba in the state of Florida, that's not going to get a strong law enforcement response, most likely, in the same way that, say, a Black Lives Matter protest might. I mean, that's the issue today.
But okay, I agree with you there, but I don't think the protests in Cuba are characterized or I agree with your characterization of them. I think what America has an embargo with Cuba, which has made Cuba a horribly impoverished country. Mm-hmm. And so the reason that they don't have medicine and food and so on is because the United States has its foot on their neck and has continued to have its foot on their neck all the way going back to 1959.
Yeah, and you know what?
That's what these people are really protesting.
We have talked about.
The media wants you to think these
listen,
protests are over freedom and whatever.
We have talked about the embargo on this show, and we will continue to. And I certainly think that is a worthy topic for debate. And the embargo certainly has made it harder for Cubans on that island. That said, today we're trying to focus on what's going on in Florida. But I do appreciate the context you provide. The embargo, that's a separate issue. And I promise you it won't be the last time we talk about it. Okay, so Dr. Kubik, the Cuban matter, in Florida, this is of particular interest, certainly, especially in South Florida. Although, we saw protests all the way up here in Jacksonville, too. There's a diaspora up here. And as the caller pointed out, there are some complex historical threads that run through all of this. But in the main, what we're talking about is a bedrock American right, the right to gather, the right to peaceably assemble, the right to protest actions by the government people disagree with. These are bedrock rights that critics such as you say are being endangered by this kind of legislation.
Absolutely. And I think the reality is that Americans have the right to protest, have a right to peaceful protest under the First Amendment. And that doesn't matter what they are protesting, whether they are protesting against the Cuban government, whether they are protesting, as they often do in Miami at least, in favor of lifting the embargo. The ACLU and our allies in this particular fight, we don't really care what you're protesting for. We do believe that you have the right to peaceful protest, and that this particular bill is designed to diminish that right, and especially to diminish it for people who disagree with those who are currently in power. I think we cannot separate that reality from this discussion, which is that when the governor and the legislature pushed this bill through as their number one priority this year, they were very clear that they were doing it to penalize folks who disagree with them. That is not acceptable under the Constitution. It's not acceptable under right or wrong. And that's something that we simply cannot allow stand, which is why we're challenging it in court. The people in power don't get to decide who gets to protest or what they get to protest in favor of.
Lawyers for the state have responded to your injunction filing. They want to sidestep mediation in this that's been ordered by a federal judge. Lawyers for Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody and Governor Ron DeSantis say mediation in this matter will not be productive. And so what is your response to their motion seeking to dismiss the case outright?
I think it's ridiculous that they would seek to dismiss the case. It's not unexpected, still ridiculous. There's a clear chilling of the First Amendment that's taking place here, and we will just continue to pursue this in court. Luckily, it is the courts and the judges who get to make the decision about that, not Governor DeSantis, not Attorney General Moody. We're in this for the long haul, and we will fight this as long as it takes in order to make sure that the First Amendment rights of all Floridians, whether they are Black and brown Floridians protesting in favor of police accountability or Cuban Americans protesting against the government of Cuba, that all of them have the right to peaceful protest and not to live in fear that they would be accused of fomenting a riot.
Your organization has been busy lately. I think it's fair to say this is just one of a number of matters you're litigating about, isn't it?
That's right. It's been a very busy time in Florida and around the country. We've seen a number of, I think, really unprecedented assaults on civil liberties and civil rights. And when that happens, we don't just throw up our hands and discuss. We get busy, and we challenge these things in legislatures, in communities, and in court.
It's interesting because your organization, of course, is a lightning rod for criticism, particularly from conservatives. That said, the ACLU has defended the rights of right-leaning groups for many years as well. Your focus is on the Bill of Rights. Your focus is on, as I said, the American values that are contained within our founding documents. Can you talk a little bit about that and how, despite some public perceptions, you're quite bipartisan in the way you defend the rights of Americans?
Oh, absolutely. So we are a nonpartisan and non-political organization. We have a point of view, which is that the Constitution should be defended, that there are rights that belong to all people, that democracy is important and should be valued and upheld, that the rights of freedom of speech should be upheld, that equality and human dignity should be upheld for all people, not just for some people. And that means that we work with anyone, anytime, anywhere to achieve that, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum. We have defended and will continue to defend the rights of people who we disagree with, because we believe that in a vibrant, rich, healthy democracy, that sort of debate and dialogue and discussion is important and makes life better for all of us. At the same time, even when we defend folks who we disagree with, we're careful to note when we disagree with them.
Let me just point out a short list of the many cases that have drawn attention. The ACLU has defended the Confederate flag, the Tea Party, the Ku Klux Klan, and Rush Limbaugh, just to name a few.
Right, and we will continue to defend folks whom we disagree with, and even while we advocate for government to do better, right? So we've defended the Confederate flag at times. We've also said that there is no obligation for any government to post the flag, and we've called for the renaming of schools there in Jacksonville, for example, that were named after Confederate generals. And I think that's consistent with saying that people have the right to do these things, and at the same time that our government should be one that is representative and inclusive of everyone. And I think some people sometimes struggle with the idea that you can do both of those things, but I think that it is true that we can uphold democracy and uphold the idea of debate while still disagreeing with people. I think that ties back to this discussion that we're having this morning about the anti-protest bill. It is possible for protests to happen and for them to be legally protected without us having to endorse every last one of them. And I think that's a lesson that the governor and others would do well to learn, that the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, allows for you to permit people to have freedom, even if you disagree with the things they do with it.
Mitch in Mandarin. Hello, Mitch. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. Real quick, I got a short comment. I have been a registered independent for many years, and recently I changed my affiliation to Democrat. I think that with the laws that our Republican neighbors are passing all over this country, that the Democrats need to vote like we've never voted before so that we can take our country back. Thank you.
Mitch, certainly people across the political spectrum are going to defend the right to vote, which is a separate issue, by the way, but one that has certainly been also in the news in recent days, Micah, and efforts to suppress the vote have really become a matter of concern, particularly on the left, but not only on the left. And so, this injunction has been filed. The state seeks to dismiss. There will be a hearing later this year. What else can you tell us before we say goodbye?
So I think we're going to be in this fight for a while to make sure that people's First Amendment rights are protected. I do think it's directly tied to the issue of voting rights that was just mentioned. Voting rights are also under attack in this country, in Florida and all over, where folks are trying to make it harder to vote. I think that's part and parcel of a broader attack on democracy, the notion of democracy, of a shared faith. And I think if we separate those two things from one another, we do a disservice to ourselves in protecting our democracy and protecting our values. In a democracy, people get to disagree. They resolve those issues amongst themselves and through debate and dialogue, not by criminalizing one another. And that's really what we've seen here.
Yeah, just this week we learned that more than 150 companies, PepsiCo, Amazon, and Target among them, through their support behind updating the Voting Rights Act. In a new letter they released Wednesday, they urged Congress to enact the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. In other words, corporate America, typically a more conservative interest in this country, is concerned enough about attempts to suppress votes that they are now calling on Congress to act.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, and it's especially remarkable that it's necessary in the first place, because keep in mind, when the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized just a few years ago, it was done with huge bipartisan majorities, barely a vote against it. And so the idea that it is controversial at all, that folks should have the right to vote, have that vote protected, that we would encourage people to vote, the fact that any of those things are now controversial propositions is really, I think, a sign that our democracy is under attack and that we have to stand up to defend it, as well as the First Amendment. These things are tied together. and they are under attack in Florida. We at the ACLU, our partners like the Northside Coalition and others in this case, we're going to do everything we can to defend these rights, to defend democracy, to defend our values.
I want to thank you, Dr. Micah Kubik, Executive Director of the ACLU of Florida. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll continue to follow this here at WJCT News. Much more still ahead on the show. Meanwhile, later in the hour, Downtown Jax is serving up a bartender competition you won't want to miss. But up next.
She was talented, and she wanted more than anything to write, and to write serious literature.
The new book capturing the legacy and the spirit of Florida iconic author Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. We'll be right back.
Ansbacher Law. Florida law imposes strict time limits on claims for construction defects. Barry Ansbacher is Florida Bar Board certified in construction law, real estate law, and condominium law. More at 737-4600 or ansbacherlaw.com.
The Jacksonville Music Experience brings you the beautiful noise emerging from Northeast Florida. Profiles, music reviews, playlists, concert recommendations, and more. JME turns your ear on the local scene. Visit jaxmusic.org to dig in.
It's the biggest stories affecting the Sunshine State. Hi, I'm Melissa Ross.
And I'm Tom Hudson. Join us Friday for the Florida Roundup.
Each week at noon, we interview newsmakers and people from across the state discussing the stories and issues that affect your life. What's driving the conversation in Florida?
Join the conversation on the Florida Roundup.
Every Friday at noon on WJCT News 89.9. Welcome back. Well, Florida author Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings is beloved for her classic novel, The Yearling, and the film that was made out of the story, too. You can also visit her former estate, now a museum, in Cross Creek, Florida. Florida author Ann McCutcheon tells us more about Rawlings than most of her fans ever knew. It's all inside the pages of a fascinating new book, The Life She Wished to Live. I spoke with McCutcheon. Take a listen. Hey, Ann. Good to be with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Well, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings is, of course, revered in literary circles, and here in Florida especially. She's so beloved. You know, people can visit the home where she once lived in north central Florida, and I really recommend everybody make that journey to Cross Creek. It's about an hour west of St. Augustine. But going beyond her legacy, there's so much we can learn about her in your new book. What motivated you to write about Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings?
Well, in a way, I am beholden to a matchmaker who suggested that I write this biography. A friend who knew that I loved Marjorie's work and that I was from Florida. I grew up in Florida. I had written a memoir of growing up, especially around Titusville in the 60s, the space program. And I had read Marjorie as a child. I'd been read to by my fourth grade teacher, The Yearling. And so when the idea came about 7 or 8 years ago, it was proposed to me by my friend, Joanne Bartlett, whose husband was also from Florida, and she just thought it would be a good subject for me, and I jumped at it as if I'd been thinking about it for many years.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great opportunity.
The Yearling is sort of a timeless story, as you said. You read it in school. Kids are going to be reading it in school for many generations to come. But
Yes.
This is really about Marjorie as a feminist and a maverick, about her as a person. And we will learn a lot about her, won't we?
We will. She was, as we like to say, ahead of her time. born in 1896 and determined at an early age to be a writer, encouraged by her mother, who was a bit of a stage mother. But she was talented, and she wanted more than anything to write, and to write serious literature. She started out wanting more to be a poet, and then a dramatist, and eventually a story writer, short stories and long fiction. But it took her a while to get there because she was also determined to earn her living as a writer. And many of us who have determined to do that for ourselves start out not as novelists or Pulitzer Prize winners, but as journalists, as newsletter writers, whatever we have, whatever offers the opportunity to put words on the page. So that's what she did after college. She worked as a publicist for the YWCA, and that led to newspaper work, and eventually she left that in order to write her serious literature.
Yeah. And her commitment came at a price, her commitment to writing.
Yes, it did. It certainly did. Her first marriage broke, one might say it broke over the success of her first novel, but that was a bit of a rickety marriage anyway. Both parties were high-strung and ambitious, and it fell apart at Cross Creek. She had health problems nearly all her life, and they were exacerbated by alcohol, by eating the rich food one can cultivate and prepare at a place like Cross Creek. She had a lot of friendships, though, a lot of close friendships. So I saw very little evidence in my research of anger directed at her or big fights. Most of her personal relationships were friendly or respectful or smooth. One very passionate friendship she had with a Macmillan book representative, Norman Berg, was rather like two positive charges, occasionally getting at each other. But, Norman was a good friend, might have married her at another point in time, and helped her complete her last novel.
And this is also a really good reason to read your book, because you write about Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings' contemporaries, the people she hung out with. Another Florida giant in the literary world, Zora Neale Hurston. But she also hung out with Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and the editor of all these writers was a legendary editor at the time, Maxwell Perkins from Scribner. He edited all of these incredible 20th century writers, including her.
Yes. It was her great fortune to be discovered by him and nourished by him for some 17 years. And it was through him that she met Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Tom Wolfe, and became part of that circle. When you say hang out, it's a little bit different for Marjorie, and especially for those times. All of these writers traveled a bit or were located in other places, so their paths would cross in New York, for example. There they would hang out. Hemingway might be coming through Florida and stop at Marjorie's place. Marjorie might be summering in North Carolina and run into Fitzgerald. But all of these encounters were very rich and important to all of them. So that was the way it went at the time. Day by day, she was so often at Cross Creek with her neighbors. And then her second husband, Norton Baskin, more in St. Augustine.
And as I mentioned, in addition to reading your book, people should go and see Cross Creek. You can visit it. And that's really a trip that's worth everyone's time.
Oh, yes. It's worth your time many times. I can't count how many times I've been there. And even before I began work on the biography, I went there as a young woman when I was a student at Florida State. I've returned many times. I have a high school friend who has a lake house shoot on Brooklyn Lake, not too far in Keystone Heights. Every time I visit, we go there. And then we dine at the Yearling restaurant.
Nice. That's a nice tradition. Well, I salute you on this new book. Anne McCutcheon, the author of The Life She Wished to Live, a biography of Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, author of The Yearling. Anne, thanks so much for joining us.
A pleasure, Melissa. Thank you.
Well, earlier this month, Jacksonville resident Patricia Fitzpatrick turned 70 years old. Now, that's a big milestone for anyone, but for Pat, it was one she actually never thought she would reach because she had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. But Pat is going strong, and now she's working to raise money for lung cancer research. She'll take part in the American Lung Association's Lung Force Run Walk in Jacksonville next month. Pat, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, thank you so much, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you started having trouble in 2014 and learned you had lung cancer. Then what happened?
That's correct. And, I immediately started my chemotherapy and came back with a great result. And then the immunotherapy drug, Opdivo, became FDA approved. And my wonderful oncologist recommended we try that. And I've actually been on Opdivo, the immunotherapy drug, ever since then. I still get it every 3 weeks, and I'm living the best life.
Wow. You've been in remission since 2017, thanks to this immunotherapy treatment, Opdivo. That is incredible. I mean,
it is.
In the past, when someone would be diagnosed with advanced lung cancer, there was really not much hope. It's amazing how quickly things have changed with these new therapies.
Absolutely. It is. I am so lucky. The timing, I say it's always about the timing, and for me, it absolutely is that. And this drug, they've come up with so many different immunotherapy drugs since Opdivo. So there's so many people being helped with the immunotherapy through different kinds of cancers, not just lung cancer. So I am all about the research.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about this because the immunotherapy has implications for all kinds of cancers. But it's interesting to talk about lung cancer because that's typically seen as one of the deadliest and hardest to treat. So this is so encouraging for so many patients out there.
Yeah, actually lung cancer is the number one cancer killer in Florida and in the United States. And immunotherapy, the difference between immunotherapy and chemotherapy is immunotherapy actually recognizes cancer when it becomes active and will attack it and kill it. Chemotherapy, as we know, just kills everything in your body. It does take care of the cancer, but it also affects so many other organs. And a lot of people, it really takes a toll on their whole system. So the immunotherapy is amazing. There's so little side effects of it, and I know that it saved so many lives over the past 5 years.
Yeah, this has only been in the last few years. And so getting into a clinical trial was usually the way people had to get help. But is it becoming more available to more patients?
Absolutely. And I believe the clinical trial with Opdivo was for brain cancer. And I believe Jimmy Carter actually was cured back in the day of his brain cancer using Opdivo. they've got so many different ones now out there for different organs. And of course, I think the more the research, I'm hoping that one day every type of cancer can be treated with this immunotherapy drug. Any type, from pancreatic, of course, is one of the worst cancers out there. Neck cancer. I've got so many different cancers in my family right now that we're just hoping that this drug will be expanded. And again, it's all about raising the money for research. It's so important because cancer is the number one killer of humans in the whole world.
Right. And let's talk about that because dozens of new immunotherapy drugs are in the clinical pipeline, not just the one that helped you.
Right.
The immunotherapy is helping some patients, not all. So we don't want to talk about this as a panacea.
Correct.
Not everyone has had as good of results as you, Pat. Isn't that right?
I am so blessed. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But research is key. So that is why you've gone from being a really sick lung cancer patient to actually taking part in the Lung Force Run Walk in Jacksonville in August. Stronger Than Cancer. That's the name of your team. So
it is.
Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, we formed, my two incredible daughters formed this team back in, I believe it was 2017. And we got so many family and friends. And we put the team out on the website so people can join it. I also had my senior vice president at Florida Blue, where I work. She became the ambassador for lung cancer. And so we had over 100 Florida Blue employees that also did the walk, and we raised so much money for cancer research, and that's the whole point of it. It's a 3-mile walk. It's on August 21st, the hottest day of the year.
Oh, wow.
But it's a great time. We have all my grandchildren walk in it. It's just a great time. It's for such a great cause. Every step I take, I know it's going to be for one day of cure for cancer. So I just let the sweat roll off me and enjoy the time.
Right. This is so cool because this is the way that not only patients and their loved ones, but anyone can help raise money for this kind of research. You know, I have to tell you, Pat, two of my coworkers here at WJCT, who we all love dearly, have been going through cancer treatment, you know, chemo and radiation and deciding whether or not to go on tamoxifen. And so as we've kind of followed their journey, we're just very interested in this kind of life-saving research and what we can learn. Yeah. And lots of ears out there listening. Let's put Phyllis on the line. Phyllis, are you there? Go ahead. Calling in. Hi, Phyllis. Are you with us? Okay, we lost her, but she had a question about immunotherapy. If you can, before we let you go, Pat, share a little bit more about how immunotherapy works, because it actually trains the body to fight cancer cells, doesn't it?
It does. Yes, it does. It trains. It does recognize, like I said, it does recognize cancer where chemo doesn't. And the best part about the immunotherapy, of course, besides keeping you free of cancer or keeping cancer inactive in your body, is the side effects are so minimal. And I think, being able to live a 100% normal life is really the results that you see. I'm not sick. I walk every day. I'm still working full time. There's just nothing that I can't do. And when I was going through chemotherapy, which I did for 3 months, it's a very different reaction on your body. And I'm hoping that with my story that I can give hope and inspiration to all these people that are having to deal with cancer. It's a horrible way to have to live. And we know, I think everybody in the world has been touched by it one way or another. And I think my story shows when I got cancer, I thought I'd live a year with stage 4 in both lungs. Sure. And here I am 6 years later.
And in remission. You even went to Washington. You even went to Washington to advocate for more funding for immunotherapy research.
I sure did. I was selected as the advocate for the state of Florida to go to Washington, D.C., and that was, I think, 2 years ago. And that was an amazing experience in itself. And we were raising money again for cancer research. And it was just the whole experience, as bad as it's been more wonderful.
More than 1,000 immunotherapy clinical trials are going on around the country, dozens of new drugs in the clinical pipeline. Pat was successfully treated with an immunotherapy drug called Opdivo, but there are others. So how can people be part of your team and part of the Lung Force Run Walk?
Well, the Lung Force Run Walk, we have a website, and they can go on to lungforce.org Jacksonville, and we have registration and donation. If you don't want to walk, you can donate. They're also set up by teams, and our team is Stronger Than Cancer, and we'll be putting our website together this weekend if anybody wants to go out and donate. But any type of donation, from $1 to whatever, is worth. I mean, the money that goes to this research is so important. So, as little or as much as you can give, that's why we're doing this.
Well, Pat, I'm so glad you're doing well, and have fun on the walk. She's Jacksonville resident Pat Fitzpatrick, now in remission from stage 4 lung cancer after immunotherapy treatments. Pat, thanks.
Thank you for having me, Melissa.
In a moment, how you can be part of a Chopped Style bartender mixology competition downtown. That's coming up.
Community First Mortgage Champions are committed to offering a great rate, a quick close, and fewer costs at closing. Accepting applications at communityfirstfl.org. Community First Credit Union, federally insured by NCUA, Equal Housing Lender. Congaree and Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpenn.com.
A father immigrated from India to the U.S. with $1,000 in his pocket. Now his daughter straddles the two worlds. Sabreet Kang Rajiv joins us to talk about understanding her parents' journey, their hopes for their new life, and connecting those to her own story as a first-generation American. She's the author of Generation Zero. That's next time on Think. Tonight at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, a little-noticed debate in plans for infrastructure spending that poses a once-in-a-generation choice about renewable energy use. Do we bank on huge wind and solar farms with new transmission lines, or go local with rooftop solar panels and microgrids? The New York Times' Ivan Penn says the battle is intense. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Many of the issues we're grappling with today would be familiar to Justice John Marshall Harlan, who served on the Supreme Court from 1877 to 1911. Race, monopolies, the rule of law. His visionary opinions led him to be known as the Great Dissenter. Next time, we'll look at what we might learn now from the historic dissents he passed down then.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, Hyatt Regency Jacksonville is hosting a craft cocktail competition next week. It's going to feature a chopped style format, like what you see on the Food Network, with local bartenders and mixologists competing for the top spot, and some celebrity judges too. Ryan O'Hara is Assistant Director of Operations at the Downtown Hyatt, and he's on the line. Hey, Ryan, good morning.
Good morning, Melissa. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks. This sounds like a lot of fun. Tell us about what's going to happen.
Yeah, so we are super excited. Hyatt Regency Jacksonville, we're going to feature that local competition between some of the best downtown bartenders that we have in Jacksonville. We reached out to the best ones. We have Brett Smith from Morton Steakhouse, Rebecca Smith from Calford Chop House, Sione from Dos Gatos, Paul Companion from Volstead, Miles Howard from Grape and Grain, and our very own Allison Smith from Hyatt Regency Jacksonville. Just really coming together and supporting downtown Jacksonville. And it really is just become kind of the A-team, if you will, of anyone that's experienced any beverage or any culinary experience in downtown Jacksonville. This really is the cream of the crop. And so we looked at this as an opportunity to really have a lot of fun. We recently accepted a marine mission, so our hotel was closed for 6 months. And we understand that created a bit of a hardship for some of those downtown small businesses, especially those restaurants and those lounges. And so we wanted to host this contest really to promote our reopening and our commitment to support our local restaurants and send our guests into that downtown community to really experience the great culinary and beverage offerings that downtown Jacksonville has to offer.
Sure. Now, people who've watched the hit show Chopped know this format, how you're going to have them competing, the bartenders and the mixologists. Tell us about the competition.
Yes, so we actually, so those that don't know, the Chopped competition is all of these great bartenders are going to show up with a basket in front of them, and there's going to be some mystery ingredients, if you will, that'll be featured inside there. So it could be very strange things, very unique things. I don't want to give it too much away. If you want to see it, come down by Wednesday. But the bartender's going to open up the basket, and they're going to have 1 singular minute to think about a drink, and then they're going to have 4 minutes to produce that drink. And so they will have to feature one of the items that's going to be in the basket. In addition to that, we've paired it up with this lovely Centauri cocktail collection that is featuring like a Japanese-style whiskey, a Japanese-style gin, and a Japanese-style vodka. So they have to feature one of the spirits and one of the ingredients in that and create a cocktail, and it will be judged by a panel of judges, and we'll determine that winner that evening.
This is free, by the way, isn't it? Anyone can come out?
Yeah, this is free. And so, so if anyone is free on Wednesday, July 21st, we're going to start right about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So that would be a perfect time for anyone to come down to the Hyatt Regency Jacksonville. You can grab a cocktail in our tavern and wait, and it's going to be a very interactive, cool thing for you to walk around and see and kind of experience the genius behind mixology in our area.
Now, and as you said, the hospitality and hotel business has been through such a hard time, bars, restaurants. This is one way to just show a little support to this community, right?
Absolutely. All of these, it's a very tight-knit community down here in the downtown area and in all of the hospitality industry. And it's really, I feel like we're coming back and we're live, and we want to experience not only Hyatt Regency Jacksonville, but please go see Sione at Dos Gatos and Paul at Volstead. A very cool thing with this is even if you can't come down on Wednesday at 5 p.m. to see this competition, the winning cocktail is actually going to be featured in our own tavern. So we will be featuring a cocktail not unless our own bartender wins, it might be someone else's cocktail that we will be featuring in the tavern. So any of the listeners, if they can't come down on Wednesday to come see the experience, they can come into our hotel, sit in the tavern, and they can still feel like they're part of the experience and ask for that winning cocktail, whichever ends up happening.
Nice. Everybody come on out to the Hyatt next Wednesday night. Check out the Chopped Style Bartender Mixology Competition. Root for some of the city's most talented drink slingers. It's a competitive competition with local celebrity judges. This is free and a lot of fun. Ryan, thanks so much. He's Ryan O'Hara, Assistant Director of Operations at the Hyatt Regency right there downtown on the river. Thanks, Ryan. Have fun with it.
Thank you, Melissa. You have a great one. We'll see you Wednesday.
And that's our show. Thanks to producer Heather Schatz. I think she judged this competition last year, actually. Director Josh Torres, editorial director Jessica Palumbo, and digital editor Bill Bortsfield. If you have any questions, we always value your feedback about the show and other news and notes. send those emails to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org and catch our podcast up later today on all platforms, including the WJCT app. I'm Melissa Ross. We'll be back at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Have a great Thursday, everyone.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.